Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. My name is Ali Hirji. I work at Durham College in both AI and cybersecurity, and I'm also the lead on the SiberXchange Advisory Council. Before I begin, I want to remind you about the beautiful studio that I'm broadcasting from live today. This is in the town of Ajax at the beautiful and picturesque St. Francis Center. I want to thank Mayor Collier and the team for CyberX for making this happen. And I also want to acknowledge that we're on the land of the peoples of the Scugog Islands First Nation. This land is protected and governed under the Williams Treaties. You know how they say the bad actors need to get lucky every time? The good actors only need to get lucky once. Now, you may turn around and tell me that from a cybersecurity perspective, I'm implying that we operate in an environment where there are a lot of unknowns. And yes, there are a lot of known unknowns, and I will stand by that. Indulge me, if you will. Animal Farm by George Orwell. Remember that moment when the animals decided to rebel against the wicked farmer? And they decided to run by the 7 commandments? But then one fine day, Napoleon the pig, while they were discussing issues around infrastructure and resources, decided to take over in a dictatorship. Of course, Orwell was talking about, or rather critiquing, Stalin's form of government. But importantly, Orwell got us to realize something, that knowledge, whether it is of the known or the unknown, is power. But power can be destructive or constructive. Everything that you and I know and do not know about cybersecurity really comes down to how we use it, and with whom we use it, and with what intent. We live in a world today where bad actors can not only allow for the witnesses to disappear, but entire courts can disappear. We have a great responsibility on our shoulders when it comes to managing not just the enterprise posture in cybersecurity, not just our public sector, but our nations as a whole. And when you're operating with all of this knowledge and all of these unknowns and these knowns, and however else you want to frame it, the onus of responsibility on certain individuals can be quite heavy. I've never subscribed to the idea that there's a science to cybersecurity. Instead, I've always suggested that there is an art to cybersecurity. And I'm by no means an expert. I am learning with many of you as well. On the platform www.siberexchange.ca, on which you're all watching this, we have experts, we have students, we have beginners, we have practitioners. And I will hold true to the statement that we're all here to get better at the art of cybersecurity. My guest today is someone who I've looked up to, someone who has now been featured in one of the top 100 women in cybersecurity, someone who I've never said to directly, but someone who I consider a mentor, someone who I could listen to for hours on end, and who I was first exposed to at the CyberX Canadian Women in Cybersecurity in BC, meaning before Corona. I think she's an individual that will tell you that when it comes to the art of cybersecurity, she doesn't look at cybersecurity as a little mirror that you hold up to society, but a little bit of a hammer with which you shape it to be in the right form. Sherry, welcome to the Cyber Exchange and welcome to the Power Hour.
Oh, thank you, Ellie. Such nice words. Thank you so much for having me. It's what a pleasure. And the studio is fantastic, and I'm just so impressed with everything that everybody's done so far to make this virtual experience and live experience so interactive. So wonderful to be here.
Pleasure is all ours to have you, and I do appreciate you taking the time. I know there's a bit of a time difference between us, but we'll make sure that we use the next 58 minutes constructively and have a conversation through which we can sort of peer into the perspectives that you take into cybersecurity. Sherry, I want our audience to really appreciate and understand the kind of responsibility you have on your shoulders in the role that you play. Can you take the next few minutes to talk to us a little bit about what your current position is in cybersecurity? What is it that you do? And sort of give them a quick macro overview of your lens.
Sure. So Sherry Rumbolt, one of the National Information Security Officers, and my job is to I think practice security and hopefully manage the largest network for national defense in a very secure and effective manner, but also at the same time providing users and business requirements the need that they have to be able to conduct their work. My experience and background is I spent 21 years in the Army and served in the Canadian Armed Forces. So I did that, and then I kind of retired for a day. And then I went off to work with the private sector and then the government of British Columbia, mostly doing vulnerability and risk management and creating a program for them. And then I went back to D&D as a civilian to manage some of their security departments over the years. So I think a really fantastic experience for me to not only be a part of national defense in an operational environment, working overseas, being deployed, and all these other things, and seeing what it is to actually be on the front lines and dealing with IMIT and cybersecurity, but then also to come back as a civilian employee and manage some of those departments. Such a wonderful experience because you get to see things from both perspectives, and then also you understand what it is to need to meet the business needs, but also keep everybody secure and safe, and then the missions and everything else that's actually happening around the world and globally, and then all of our folks at home, as far as public safety and all these other things. It's so important, and I think that there is a bit of responsibility with all of that. And I think a lot of the times we don't really think about it. We're in autopilot,
Yep.
and we move ahead and we do what we need to do, and we just try to make things better every single day.
Sure, in cybersecurity, as in innovation, our jobs,
Sorry.
that's fine. We have a guest. That's totally cool. I will continue the conversation while you settle things down. But what I wanted to draw attention to was this aspect around how multiple or how multifaceted the world of cybersecurity from a national defense perspective can be. And really, when you look at the plethora of experiences that Sherry has been involved with, she mentioned two very critical moments. One was being at the Army and then going into the private sector and then returning back into service. And what these environments do to you is inevitably put you in a position where not only you're looking at security from two different lenses, but you're looking at it from two different standpoints, two different locations all together. The marriage between public and private sector and how we approach security can be quite challenging. And I'm going to return back to Sherry to sort of unpack that just a little bit more. Sherry, whenever you're ready, I wanted to draw your attention to this aspect of in cybersecurity, just as in innovation, our jobs are not really to reassure people. It's more to cause disruption. It's more to get people to think differently about the same stuff. When you started talking about cybersecurity in the public sector and in sort of the defense arena, how much of a common currency or how much of a common language was that? Was it something new? And was it something that you had to sort of knock not once, but a couple of times in the door to get people to realize the essence of cybersecurity from a national defense perspective?
Oh, I think it's pretty well the same all around. I mean, whether we look at it from a private or a public sector perspective, or looking at it from just a general industry perspective, I think it's all we all have similar goals, and that is to protect the assets and the information that we're actually, I guess, in charge of at that time. And the when you look at each of the landscapes, it doesn't matter if you're actually in Canada in a normal situation, business requirements situation, or if we're overseas, or if we're in any other type of environment, it's all the same. Like we still have a certain job to do. How we do it and culturally how that looks is often a little bit different, but I think just taking it from the same perspective every single time, sort of dialing it down and saying what's our priorities, what are the things that we actually need to achieve, and where is it that we have pain points, and let's focus on those pain points and work towards those. So it's really understanding the cultural environment that you work in, and then also what the operational or business needs are. So I mean, looking at it from any perspective, whether it's the health industry, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the public sector, or even schools or colleges, everybody has a different type of requirement, but we all have the same goal.
Yep.
I guess in cybersecurity. So it's how do we achieve that goal, understanding where we're actually trying to effectively manage our security requirements and needs. I don't know if that is actually answering your
Yeah.
question to the best of, to what you're like looking for. But I think in the long run, we it's really smart to understand what it is that you're trying to
Yeah.
achieve first. So, you can't go in and, as one of my bosses used to say, boil the ocean every single time.
Yeah.
Go in, look at everything from a perspective and say, what do I need to do today? And where can we effectively manage some of these areas, whether we have concerns or not. I think every organization has concerns, and I think everybody, there's not unlimited funds and there's not
Yep.
unlimited resources to
Yep.
be able to achieve your needs. So where can you actually take what you have and make it a little bit better?
I am of the opinion that in our age, there's no such thing as keeping out of political issues. Almost everything has a political ingredient or a political flavor within it and a personal element in it as well. Can you help our audience understand a little bit when we talk about this concept of cybersecurity as a national security issue or as a matter of national interest? What do we mean by that? Because from my perspective, when I look at that, yes, directly, if you, as you mentioned, being one of the security officers with national defense here in Canada, of course, you're dealing with our sea forces, our land forces, etc. But there's something broader to when we talk about cybersecurity as a matter of national interest. Can you shed light for our audience on what do we mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think that we're looking at it from a whole bunch of different perspectives. For us, given my current role, we need to ensure that we're meeting, our experiences, and we can actually get people to work and working effectively, especially during times like this where we're having a multitude of remote workers and whatnot, and we're just making sure that we can still maintain certain level of operations across, the organization. Uh, I think that when we say a matter of national security, I think that there's a lot of different things that happen. So, the question is how much information do you want to provide? How much information do you want to give? And there's a lot of what we call bad actors out there and people that just want to do harm. And I think that there's a lot of situations in which people are looking for an opportunity for financial gain or whatever it is that you're trying to do. I mean, there could be something even as much as bragging rights to see who's going to get the vaccine first out on the market for COVID-19, right? So, I mean, when we think about national security, we think about what is that information, how harmful, and what is the injury of actually having that information exposed in one way or the other, and then how much information do people want to actually provide. So without getting into too many specifics about my current organization,
Yep.
I think it's really important that everybody understands that information is power,
Yep.
and it is very, very valuable depending on what the context it is that you're looking for. There's certain information that may not be valuable to you or it may not be valuable to me, but it could certainly be valuable to somebody that wants to do some form of harm to a political organization and or to governments and or to, I mean, achieve some sort of goal in mind. So everybody's motive is different. So I
Yep.
think that there's a huge amount of psychology
Sure.
around cybersecurity and also around what bad actors or folks that are out there that are trying to achieve a certain goal, what their motives are, and what that actually means um, to them and to us.
Yep.
And then protecting that information is key, right? So
Yep.
when I go on about that, national security or any type of security is as good as the education, knowledge, and information that you're actually providing to the housekeepers or the custodians of that information. So when you look at custodians of information, your organization, depending on how many people you have working there and what need to know or whatever they have, it's important that they understand the value of what it is that they're safekeeping.
You know,
So I guess when we talk about national security, we're talking about that in general.
Yesterday we had our friend Kat Kood, who is a fellow advisor on our
Yes.
committee on here, and she sort of reminded us similarly in this vein about national security and personal security. She reminded us, issues about privacy, for example, which is her forte and her area of work and her area of thought. She mentioned that it's not about that we have something to hide, but we have something to protect, and privacy really is about that element. So you need to know what is it that you need to protect, why, and how. I want to sort of park this notion that we've been dealing with a little bit around national interest, etc. And we'll come to it in the next 10 minutes, perhaps. But I really want to get another sort of optic into Sherry, and your journey that you talked about, which is beginning in the military and then going back into private sector and then being called back and then specializing in cybersecurity. I say this all the time that if you're waiting until you have enough talent, you're never going to get it done. What was your experience like, and at what point did you feel that, hey, cyber is a place that I want to go and, for lack of a better word, express my voice and flex my muscle?
Well, I think that for me, my career started out like I actually did IMIT at the beginning of my career, and was more into electrical engineering and communications. So I started to go down that path at first, and then I remember working in some areas where I was assisting with some encryption, also designing certain level of networks to assist with operational missions and things like that. And being in the military, you have 2 or 3 years in a spot, and then
Yeah.
they decide that you probably need to go somewhere else. So I remember being here in Victoria in Esquimalt, working at the base here, and it was a great experience. Of course, BC is lovely, and I had a call to go to Ottawa and. Or Edmonton, Alberta. So they had asked me which post I would like to have, and I was told to it was probably a better idea to go to Ottawa because there was much more opportunity. It's our hub, and it's what we call the mothership for national defense.
Yep.
And that's where most of our folks are working. That and there's some really talented folks to learn from. So I took that opportunity and I went there and I went to a place called the Canadian Forces Network Operations
Yep.
Center, and it was the computer incident response team. So of course, this was like in the really beginning stages of building this SOC, if you will. And when I walked in, I'm like, wow, this is like a really cool place to be. I think that, just it felt like you were coming into sort of a version of Starship
Yep.
Enterprise or whatnot. And there was a lot of cool things happening. So I'm like, wow, this is a lot of fun. And I started to train and become a incident responder for cybersecurity. And I think the passion, the knowledgeable folks that were around me at the time, my colleagues and my supervisors were so passionate about moving in this direction that I don't know, you just have that bug, and all of a
Yep.
sudden you wake up and you're like, this is my calling. This is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And it was a fantastic experience for me, just so much fun. And I learned so much. And then I went on to think, every other job I had after that, including some missions in Egypt and whatnot, I was like, I always sort of ventured into the world of security no matter what, and sort of made it a part of my job, even if I was actually not assigned to that specifically. I was doing IMIT. So I think that as I went along, I'm like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And I remember being asked to come and work specifically in cybersecurity after that. So they were actually tailoring positions for me so I can actually work in that environment. So I think that you just become passionate. It sort of catches you. And none of us do this because we want to be popular. And none of us do this because we want to, work long hours or whatnot. But I think that we just have a passion for it, and somehow it hits you, and it's a bit of a bug, and then you realize that you could do some good, and
Yep.
and it's so important to be able to do that good.
Mandela said that, education is the most powerful tool with which you can change the world and change an individual. In this whole process of going through different experiences, different organizations, how did you keep up to date with the changes? And what kind of certifications or trainings did you put yourself through to make sure that you weren't just relevant to the industry, but you were relevant also in terms of just knowing for yourself that this is who I really want to be?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I mean, for like I went through, of course, the national defense school systems that we have. We have our own private schools and things like that. But then I think that what became very apparent, especially when Every single job I took, so sometimes I'd be a firewall admin
Yeah.
or an IDS and SIEM solution administrator. I could be a network administrator, or I could be doing cryptography. So every single position that I was in, of course, needed some necessary training. So the list of the training that I've had over the years is extensive and very, very long. At one point, I took over and became the forensics specialist, and took over a department for doing forensics for national defense as well. So every opportunity that I was given, I took it. And then when I took that opportunity, I realized, ooh, now I have to learn FTK. Now I have to learn NCASE
Yeah.
because I'm a forensics, expert, and I'm supposed to be running the show. So
Right.
I always have this motto that I need to know, what's happening in any position that I take, especially if I'm managing and leading people. So I
Yeah.
have to be more, I have to be able to understand whatever role is, even if it's a managerial role. I still need to be able to talk and walk to walk kind of thing. So I always jump in there with my team members. And I think it's really important because, even from any perspective, the more knowledge we have, the better we're going to be at what we're doing. So I've never said no to any opportunity as long along the way. I've got certifications, of course, my CISP and
Yeah.
CISM and things like that that's necessary. But I've got so much different diverse training, and I've taken every opportunity to learn. So, if someone says, hey, we need you to take a course on, I don't know, some sort of firewall, I'm like, sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
Why not? Let's learn that, because learning is so important. We always, and not just learning through, schooling, certifications, degrees, but learning through our colleagues, our mentors, our, folks in the industry. I always think it's so important. Ask those questions. Be a part of the solution. Be a part of the organization that you're with. Say yes. Jump in and enjoy the ride, because you're going to learn something from that. So even for me, if taking all kinds of training or even taking a job, if someone said to me, would you like to go manage a data center in Egypt? And I'm like, sure, why not?
Right.
Like, do it, because it's always going to benefit you. You might learn that maybe I'm not interested in learning about VoIP telephony, but anyways, you
Right.
you know something about VoIP telephony now, and you can attribute that somewhere along the way, because I find that these are all building blocks. And what I've learned in my career is that even from the beginning in the 90s right up until now, every single thing that I've done is a building block towards whatever it is that I'm supposed to be destined to do.
Yeah.
And I just take those opportunities as they come.
You're sort of helping me sort of swim back to the shores of our starting discussion, which was this idea of national interest. And I've got a very strong sense of how you've approached training in cybersecurity, how you've approached learnings in cybersecurity. When I asked you this aspect about cybersecurity as a matter of national interest, you pointed out to businesses being essential to our economy, social organizations being essential to our economy, everything that keeps us bound together in the fabric of society. Securing that is a matter of national focus. Within that, if you peel the layers a little bit, I want to go to one particular layer which I contend with on a regular basis, and that is the aspect of talent. On our Cyber Exchange Advisory Committee, we have folks from around the world. And not
Mm-hmm.
too long ago, I was having a conversation with Selaja, who's from India, and we were
Mm-hmm.
having this idea. We're talking about India, and I mentioned to her that in India alone, and my stats, maybe I am slightly allergic to math, so you'll forgive me if my my stats are a little off here. But I think in India there are about 164 million young folks ready to break into the workforce. And when it comes to India, they talk about this idea of they have the people power, they have the information, they have well fed minds, but it's a matter of having well formed minds. You can have all of the information, you can have all of the knowledge, but how you apply it is where the real magic happens. So I want to spin that a little bit and ask you, from a cybersecurity perspective, do you see the talent gap in the same way as most people see it, which is that there are not enough cybersecurity practitioners out there? Or would you say that there are quite a few cybersecurity practitioners out there, but they don't quite realize what it means to operationalize cybersecurity? What's your perspective on our talent deficit, if any?
Well, I think that there's a lot more people now that are interested in the field, and I think that there are a lot more cybersecurity experts out there than what we think. Because I think that there's people that come from many different walks of life and different organizations that actually can provide great value in cybersecurity. Because it's not just a technical field. You have, and I think that a lot of people have to understand that it's not just that. It's a lot about the social side. It's a lot of psychology embedded. There's a lot of communications now that need to be that need to become front and center. I mean, there's a huge social piece with how we interact and how we're actually dealing with people. So it's not about how much you know.
Yep.
Often too, it's about how you apply it. So for me in my daily job, sure, I have some technical background knowledge, and I understand security, but I also have a huge social role to play. So what I always say to anybody that would ask me to mentor them or ask for some advice is that look at everything from a perspective and actually understand what it is that you want to do. There's a lot of people that are actually fantastic cybersecurity experts and they don't come from a technical background.
Yep.
Because I have people on different teams that are education and awareness. They do well in education and awareness. They don't have a high technical background, but they're fantastic writers. They're fantastic teachers. They're great mentors. They're folks that can actually really provide uh, incredible value to our employees and our users and things like that. There's technical teams and they are required as well. But there's a huge aspect of what could be brought to the thing and to the table when it comes to cybersecurity. And there's like 52 different types of professions within cybersecurity alone,
Yep.
right? I mean, we've got pen testers, we've got data security experts and information security, we've got incident responders, education and awareness advisory services. We've got so many different aspects of that. So there is something for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that the talent shortage is not really there. It's how we can actually bring people into the organization. Within the public sector, sometimes it's a little bit more
Sure.
complicated
Yeah.
because of security clearance requirements, citizenship requirements, and all of these other things that are required to actually get people in the door. When I'm not, it takes a lot longer. Like for me, when I start a process, it could be 6 months to a year before we
Yeah.
actually physically have a human in a seat. The private sector, right now, I mean, people are still shuffling around even during COVID, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, now's a great time to actually be looking out there. I think for if I'm looking at young professionals and people that are looking to break into cybersecurity, networking is such a huge aspect right now. And then, a lot of the students say to me, or young professionals, they say, well, how do I network? I mean, LinkedIn, of course, is a good platform. Now, SiberXchange is a great platform.
Yep.
There's a lot of good platforms out there, but it's about understanding and asking the questions and things. Like for me, anytime I set myself to set a goal to actually have a profession or get a certain type of job, I had to like learn what it was that I was actually interested in doing. So, when someone comes to me and says, I want to be a cybersecurity professional, I always ask them the same thing right away. And that is what field do you want in cybersecurity to focus your attention? And I'm not saying that that's going to be that's going to be your liftoff, but that's not going to be your end goal. So, saying that I want to, become a forensics expert right out of the gate is probably not going to happen, right? Because it takes layer and build, you need to build on that knowledge. And you have to have a pretty strong understanding of background networking. Same thing with pen testing
Yep.
and things like that. But education and awareness, advisory services, or just general practitioners. I mean, there's those opportunities there to go in there and have those stepping stones to start building that talent.
Yep.
So, have an idea about what it is that you're interested in, and then don't be afraid to move too. Once you actually get into a field, say, well, maybe this is not for me. Move along to something a little bit different. I think that there's so much opportunity there, but it's almost like finding that magic sweet spot to help you fit into whatever role that you're trying to achieve. And I always ask people, do you want to be in the public sector? Do you want to be in the private sector?
Right.
Do you want to be in like a school system, educational system, or whatnot? Because each of those has different cultural influences,
Yep.
and also it might not be the right fit for you as a professional,
Yep.
right? So there's so many different things. If you're really wanting to be innovative and agile and moving along very quickly, private sector is a really great place to be because things move fast.
Right.
Public sector things don't move quite as fast, but it's very structured, and there's lots of opportunity for, I guess you could say, kind of feeling that sense that you're kind of embedded into a system and you're part of a family kind of thing.
Yep.
That's what I always like to say when it comes to public sector. So it's a little bit different across the board
Yep.
depending on what it is that you need. So having that understanding, but is the gap there? There's a lot of students and there's a lot of young professionals. There's a lot of people that want to change profession that are really interested in getting into the field. I think us as experts or folks that are more seasoned,
Yep.
it's our responsibility to help guide them.
Yep.
So, I'm hoping that somehow we can get that forum going so that we can actually guide people in the right direction.
Yeah. Speaking of guidance, and I always mention this, especially to our audience, is I've always held this true to myself is this aspect of you never really lose. You either win or you learn. And I think it's very important that you have that mindset when you go into assuming that you want to get into the space of cybersecurity or any space for that matter. And I want to weave in a question that we've received and sort of just put that into the context right now, Sherry. And that is this aspect of you mentioned, the data center in Egypt, and you mentioned moving geographically. I mean, you and I have probably shared the same ideal that the world's a book, and those who don't read it simply refuse to travel, or those who don't travel simply refuse to read it. However you look at it. How important was it for you? And this, I'll read this verbatim. How important was it for you to have those experiences outside of Canada? What did that do to your understandings of cybersecurity?
Oh, it's phenomenal. That's the one beauty of actually serving in the Canadian Armed Forces for me was fantastic because I got a chance to work with many, many different other nations and allied nations in NATO and whatnot, and to learn from their experiences as well. Like we did exchange programs
Yeah.
for cybersecurity, and we have our Five Eyes community. So it's Canada, the U.S., the U.K., Australia, New Zealand, and whatnot. And we would all do exchanges and bring people in from different other countries, and we would all learn from each other. And I even got to go to Australia. I spent quite a bit of time in Washington D.C. and places like
Yep.
that for my earlier profession when I was actually in uniform. And then when opportunities came to actually go and serve, when I was in Egypt, I served with 14 other countries. And it was 1,800 people on the military camp, and we were providing IMIT and support services and security, and we're also looking after our own countries, but then looking after the multinational area as well. So such a diverse aspect of learning, training, looking at what everybody else does, and how they actually culturally work within their environments. So the social experiment is great. And I always encourage people to take opportunities to work in not only other countries, but in other areas across Canada, because everywhere you work and how you actually, interact with those people, it's very, very different. I did many stints across the country as well and worked in different provinces.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same thing. Everybody works differently. The cultural aspects are different, even within D&D.
Yep.
So it's really quite a diverse amount of knowledge and experience that you can gain from taking opportunities as they come. And I would encourage that greatly. I think that everybody should, take that opportunity, sort of go outside of their comfort zone once in a while, and
Yep.
it's important. We all learn when we take ourselves outside of our families and our normal friends and our comfort zone. We learn a lot of valuable lessons about ourselves and what it is that we actually want to achieve in our career as well.
My dad always tells me is, be careful about the 5 people that you choose to surround yourself with because often we become like one of those 5. The role that you've had, and you will forgive me if I ask a question that you can't quite get into. Feel free to tell me that. I am learning this whole process, and I may make some mistakes, so I do seek your forgiveness there. How did you conduct yourself, and what were the skills that you realized you as an individual needed to adopt in order to become more proficient in this environment. Not only is the fact that you're in a very sensitive context, which is around national defense and the military, etc., but cybersecurity in and of itself, like I said earlier, right? It's this knowledge, and knowledge is power. It can construct or it can destruct. What were the practices that you did to stay grounded and to ensure that you had a personal code of ethics of sorts, that you were committed to what you were doing and not derailed in any way? Sherry?
Well, I think it's really important to understand yourself, and then also, I mean, of course, given my position and clearances and things that we actually have, we are sort of guided, in what we can reveal, what we can't reveal, and
Yep.
things like that. There, and also there's like important things that we need to understand. So there's a lot of training that comes into play there, but at the same time, too, like ethically, it's really important to understand what information it is that you're actually carrying with you, whether it's proprietary to a certain company, private sector, or public. But understand that that information is valuable to somebody. So then also, what levels of influence does somebody else have over you? So it's understanding yourself as well, and don't put yourself in a precarious position. It's very important. I mean, we've seen lots of cases where folks are, um, I guess you could say, taking monetary gain or whatnot
Yep.
just to get ahead, and they may be going outside of the ethical norm.
Yep.
We've seen that a lot. For myself personally, I always find it's important. I live by a certain general rule that's really important, and that is always be honest, always be true to yourself, and always be kind
Yep.
to other people, because everybody has a situation in their lives, and we all have good days and we all have bad days. So it's really important to treat everybody in the same equal, fair sort of manner. So it's always been a part of my being, and any situation that I go into, I always look at that, and I know the responsibility that I have as a professional in my field. So whether I'm working in a private sector, public sector, or whatnot, it's important to be as outgoing and sharing and everything as you can be, but also know your limitations.
Yep.
So, and if you don't understand that, you should probably have that conversation with whoever your manager or whoever's employing you at the time. I think that too, it's important to ground yourself and be effective. So I'll tell you a little story real quick, and that is when I was in Egypt. Culturally, that was way back in 2007,
Yep.
and here I am, a female going into an environment in which most of my employees were from different countries, some from the UK, some from Egypt and whatnot, and then some from Canada, mostly not female.
Yep.
And my thought process was, wow, how are they going to accept me? And how is this going to work? And am I going to be effective? Uh,
Yep.
Perhaps as a supervisor or whatnot. And it kind of concerned me at first. And then I'm like, I'm up for the challenge. I think that I know kind of what I'm doing. So then there's this whole cultural and social aspect that has to come into play here now.
Yep.
So going in there, I can tell that they were kind of nervous about me, and I was kind of nervous about
About
them.
them.
But I remember, they were some of my engineers and team were like wiring and cabling outside in 30-degree weather, in the middle of the day, and it's such hot days and things like that. And I'm like, you know, I used to do that job. I never did it probably at 30-degree weather outside in the middle of a desert, but anyway, I used to be able to do that too.
Yep.
And I can terminate a cable, and I could, terminate fiber just like anybody else.
Right.
So why won't I be out there with them? Because, being a part of your team and being with them and showing them that you actually care about the work that they're doing on a regular basis is so important. So, I'd go and grab my umbrella and my little chair, and I'd go out there in the middle of the desert with them, and I'd terminate cable with them, for several hours a day, and I'd bring them snacks and things like that. And what I found is that we had these bonds because I learned things about their family. I learned things
Yep.
about the my employees that were more of the human factor. And then for the remainder of the time that I was there, I had this fantastic relationship with all of these people because they also realized that I cared about them and I cared about learning something about them. I think it's really important to think that we're not just human beings coming in and doing a job every single day, and that we're like a number, if you will.
Yep.
We have to put a certain human aspect into working together, because in cybersecurity it's so important, because when the crap hits the fan and we have a really bad day, you want to be able to count on your team,
Yep.
and you want them to be there by your side, and they want you to be by their side. So it's so important to have that interactions and to understand and get to know people. It it's so, like, I think it's, I can't stress how important that is, and that's something that's always been with me. So I know everything there is to know about my employees when I say whatever they want to share. So I know how many kids they have, and I know what they do outside of work, and what their passions are and things like that, because it builds a team, it's a bond, it strengthens the relationships, and it also gives everybody a feeling that we're in this together. It's
Yep.
not just, you're not alone. And I think especially during COVID-19 and
Yep.
everything that's happening right now, it's so much more paramount to actually have that human factor involved in our day-to-day work,
Yep.
and to show that we actually care, about the everybody that we're working with and alongside. So and also the humor aspect. You got to have a good sense of
You
humor,
have a good
right? So
laugh. Yeah.
I think I kind of went off on a huge
No.
tangent there, Ellie. But anyway, I just wanted to share that
Far
because
from. Yeah.
I think sometimes we're way too dug into just the technical aspects of our job, and punching the clock and things like that. But we also need to know that we're so much more effective when we bond.
Yep. No, and I think your leadership philosophy has come out so poetically here in the aspect that you've reminded us that as a leader, your job is not to tell people what to do, but to show them how to get it done. And this speaks very strongly to your recent nomination as one of the top women in cybersecurity. I want to go into this a little bit and also weave in a few questions that are coming my way. One of it being around how important is it to you to be this leader in women in cybersecurity? And how have you been able to mentor other young women looking, or not necessarily just women, but other folks who may be from different identities, different communities? How have you been able to mentor them through breaking into this space, whether it's in your environment of work or in the private sector?
Well, I think that there's a place for everybody.
Yeah,
And I mean, again, we all talk about these shortages in cybersecurity, and I'm like, well, why can't everybody participate in this?
right.
And there's so many fantastic people out there, not just women, but people of different, culture backgrounds and whatnot, that are just brilliant people. They just need to be given an opportunity to shine. And that's where we need to focus our
I
attention
agree.
on diversity, getting different perspectives. And when I say diversity, I'm also saying, age gaps. Like, I would, it's so great to mix a team of seasoned experts that have been in the field for a lot of years with young professionals that are just coming into the space as well, because you get this huge dynamic of I guess you could say, age limitations, as well as everybody's kind of like learning from a different perspective.
Sure.
And sometimes to us, seasoned folks, have done things a certain way for a lot of years, and having a new perspective on that is a fantastic opportunity. So I love sort of like putting everybody together and seeing how it sort of comes out, because I think that we all have so much to learn. So the younger generations have so much to learn from the seasoned experts, and then the seasoned folks can learn some really new tricks and tips on how to do something probably smarter and faster and better and whatnot. So that's all great. As far as the women in cybersecurity piece, yeah, like, it's a very big passion of mine, mainly because I've been in a more male dominated world for a long, long time, especially being in the army. And my job was to be like the guys.
Yeah.
So I mean, I really had to be one of the guys in order for me to survive, and to actually even perhaps grow as a professional. I had to be similar to them, but I would never always be them. So then after a while I realized that being a part of the gang and being like everybody else is not necessarily going to serve me in the long run. So maybe I should just be myself.
Yep.
And at one point I just pivoted and I'm like, I need to be myself. I need to show who I am. Yeah, I really want to, put on my makeup and wear skirts and, have red lipstick on and all these other great things. But I
Right.
also want to, show that I can actually do the same job as my counterparts. And there's no reason why we can't. And there's not just from a woman's perspective, but also from, anybody that's interested in this field. Everybody can do whatever they want
Yep.
as long as they want to do
Yep.
this.
Uh, uh,
So and it's not always easy,
yep.
and it's, I've had opportunities too where I felt like I wasn't necessarily invited to the table, and there's been times when, I might have been leading a department and I wasn't even invited to a meeting for cybersecurity.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, so how is the lead for security not invited to a meeting that's talking about security?
Right.
It happens. And it's like, oh yeah, we forgot about you, or something like that. So I mean, these things happen. It happens.
Yep.
And then you wonder why, is it, why did that happen? So again, too, there's a lot of cultural barriers that we still need to break down.
Yep.
We still got a long ways to go. We need to make sure that everybody, it doesn't matter who you are, but you're actually being invited because of what you do and the role that you play.
Yep.
And none of the other stuff should absolutely matter. It shouldn't matter at all. You need to be a part of the situation. But I mean, not only in cyber too, we still have silos, tons and tons of silos, of everybody doing kind of their own thing. So we need to break down those barriers as well.
Yep.
And I think that once we break down some of those barriers, we're actually going to be more effective across the board to getting people in jobs and everybody having a place to
Yep.
to to be able to show their talent.
I think this aspect of women in cybersecurity, people of color in cybersecurity, people of different ages, abilities, sexual orientation, to many will seem almost like an impossible sort of social achievement, but it's always impossible until it's done. And I think the work that you've done has really shown us how it can get done. Now, I have a question. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead,
Okay,
Sherry.
go ahead. No, I was going to say
Yeah.
eventually it shouldn't even be a concern. Like, I mean, it's going to be the new norm eventually.
Yep.
It's going to be the new norm. And I think that we're really, really, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've really made some huge strides through towards diversity and things like that. So, I mean, I think it's really, really important to show that everybody has something to offer and to be open to taking those suggestions and also taking a chance on people. I
Yep.
mean, I've been on panels
Oh,
before
yes.
where
Yeah.
people have said to me, "I'm not sure if I would choose that person," and I'm like, "Well, I can actually see something really great in that person." And
Yep.
I think that we need to not take the person that's got 15 years of experience, been around the block. Let's take a chance on somebody else that
Yep.
might bring a new perspective.
Yep.
You know.
I've got a question here that I am struggling to sort of punctuate politically correct, but I will
Okay.
try my best, and I'm going to rely on, and again, if I have any of my friends watching, they will know that my Netflix diet has a lot of narcos in it. So I'm gonna draw from that, where I remember this line in which they said, we make the purpose of war is peace. And I think this question is kind of asking that, you mentioned that you were in Egypt and other countries. And Egypt, round about the time, well, probably about 2 or 3 years before the Arab Spring
Mhm.
kicked in. What is your perspective on A, how did that, the experiencing of, being in communities where people were, there was political unrest, but how has that shaped your security posture or your security approach when it comes to aggressive tactics in security? Are you of the opinion that we just defend and keep ourselves secure, or do you engage in opportunities where you can actually go and push the limits and see how far you can actually test weaknesses around you?
Mm, wow. I certainly don't go that route.
Yeah.
That I am still very much a person that I think that, we have an ethical responsibility to, in security, we have an ethical responsibility to try to defend and protect whatever it is that we're trying to protect at
Yep.
the time. And I think that, following a code of conduct for me that's very, very much in line with my ethical values is very important.
Yep.
So, um, So I'll say that. It doesn't matter where you're actually practicing your profession. I think that you still have to practice that profession in a manner that's keeping with, well, hopefully, organizational objectives, of course,
Yep.
and that you're above the line as far as your ethical responsibility to actually, do that work. So I always say, if you have to question anything that you do, then you need to take a pause and you need to sit back and you say, okay, what is it that's actually happening right now, and what's the best objective for me? And if you don't understand that, then maybe it's a good idea to talk to somebody that's more experienced. But I mean, always take the higher road is what I say,
Yep.
when it comes to actually how we do our business. So it's really, really important. It doesn't matter where you work, or what country you're in, or
Yeah.
whether or not there's, at the time in Egypt, I mean, we still had threats of bombing every single time I left the camp in my, armored vehicle. I was taking a risk. And, I've been in situations in which, I'm up at the Gaza Strip, and yeah,
Yeah.
there's bombings happening right in front of my face and around me. And I'm taking cover. So, I mean, those things happen. And those are situations that we live with during our profession, depending on what it is that you do. Most people probably don't have to do that. But anyway, at the same time, you're there fixing the microwave towers so that the Fijians can get Wi Fi,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But, there's bombing happening,
Right.
and you're still trying to get them connectivity so that they can probably watch some program or communicate with their family back home. So what's more important to me? It's getting that connectivity, making sure that they have what they need so that we can meet their needs for morale and welfare and things like that, and that they can also communicate back to camp. So
Yeah.
important things. So I think that when you look at each thing, if you have to think that there's an ethical question there, then I would say take a pause and ask yourself,
Yep.
if you're doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And I'm sort of thinking through, where did this question sort of germinate from? And I think it has a lot to do with the state of affairs in the world today, right?
Yeah.
Often, and you hear this said very loosely, where people talk about what the hopefully we don't have to see that moment, but what World War III would look like, you find a lot of people saying that it's going to be entirely ranged or played out in cyber environments. I think, I was talking to Shireen Nasher from KPMG. She's from Iran. And then after 2020 began with us ignoring all the COVID stories, but staying very focused on the conversations between two powerful seats with too little people on it, between Trump and Iran. And we all know how infrastructure was targeted digitally, and certain scenes started emerging where you were like, this has the signatures of all of those anomalies of a cyber attack, right? And I think a lot of
Yeah.
folks are now, and especially young students, are sort of thinking, oh, we'll get into cyber defense, and it's all about when do we go to war? And I think you've very carefully mentioned that this is about, we're not going to be the first ones to fire the first arrow. We will stay, we will hold by our lines, and if someone has to instigate, let it be them, because history will report on that. And I think that's a very good sort of plateau on which to say, let's depart from this vein of conversation. We've got about another 6 minutes left, and I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier on, and that is the aspect of the private sector, right? And where do you see now, because you've got this lens of, and maybe we're glamorizing it a little too much, but you're seeing cybersecurity attacks and threats from a variety of perspectives. In your opinion, when it comes to the private sector, business and commerce, especially with so much going, the enterprise moving home and the e-commerce environments that we're operating in within, where do you see, if you had to rate some of the top areas of risk to businesses and the private sector, what would you say to that?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a bit of an interesting question. I think that I mean, I can't speak as much to what's actually happening in the private sector, other than I know that when we look at it from different perspectives, everybody's trying to figure out, like, the private sector has not been hit as much by COVID-19 in terms of remote work and things like that there, but they have been impacted greatly, especially if you're organizations that are looking for contract obligations or, some sort of financial, selling products or whatever to try to achieve a certain goal. So, when you look at private sector, when you think about the commercial side of, say, shopping and all of these other things, I mean, that's been widely impacted and we have some major concerns. But from, I think, other aspects of sales and things like that, I've talked to a lot of people and they said it's been a little bit seamless, but that I'm kind of like not answering your question 100%, but I feel that the impacts are great financially, but from a security perspective, I'm not 100% sure how affected they are,
Yep.
if that makes any sense to
Yeah,
you.
no, it does. And I think it's very crucial for us to realize is that, the vein of conversation that we've had in the Power Hour has always focused on this aspect of, and this is nothing new to professionals like yourself, that the perimeter has shifted. It's dead in many cases. Hiding behind a wall no longer is sort of the stance that we can take, and we need to realize the various areas and the various pockets that need to be protected. But I think this goes to something that you mentioned earlier on, is that the more we will talk about it, the more we will actually learn how to walk through it and work through it. And I think, when you mention this aspect of awareness programming, it ties very neatly into, the platforms where you can learn more, the platforms for exchange, so on and so forth. So tell me a little bit more about, in your perspective, what are you doing, or what approaches do you take to ensure that the right amount of awareness is spreading out there, that people know what they need to know from a security perspective?
Well, I mean, it was really interesting for us because, I mean, we had a very on-premise kind of workforce,
Yep.
especially most public sectors do. And we had a very, very, everything kind of came to a bit of a standstill, and all of a sudden everybody's, at home. And then to get everybody back to work in a remote instance happened very, very quickly. I mean, we do have, VPN tunnels and all that stuff where people can actually communicate. But I mean, we ramped up Office 365 in a heartbeat, and started onboarding people and getting people to work that way. That's a bit of a conundrum during that situation because we're like, okay, security is very important. We need to make sure that folks are not using personal systems to do business,
Right.
especially anything sensitive. And then also, communications and all that stuff has to be done a certain way. But how do you get that message out to people if they don't have connectivity, right? So I mean, we in some cases I think that everybody's going back to what we call the POTS, the plain old telephone, and just getting back on the phone and starting to speak back with their employees and stuff. So we had to sort of dial down where we would normally use emails and our internal platforms and education systems to educate people on things. We had to go dial it back down to supervisory
Yeah.
level, sending information or having quick team meetings and explaining things to their employees, and sort of going back right down into the weeds of getting that information out there. So really interesting times for that because, I think depending on how big the organization is, and how their technology is rolled out, it depends on how much education you're going to get out
I
there,
agree.
especially during this time. But internally, I mean, generally, there's a lot of really good information that's coming out. We use many different avenues for that. But one thing I always say to people is try to sort of use a layered awareness program, not just email,
Yeah.
not just posting something on your internal websites,
Yeah.
and use a blended learning. And Ali, you
Excellent.
can probably attest to all of that, but
Sure.
using a blended learning platform
Yeah.
to make sure that you're educating and training
Absolutely.
your employees in a certain way, and then making sure that that hosted training is done across many different avenues, because not everybody is going to respond
I
in
agree.
the
Yeah.
same way or actually read. So a lot of people don't necessarily read a lot of emails, right? Or they do read emails, but then if you saturate that, then they're not going to really pay attention.
No.
So it's a blended sort of approach to education.
Fantastic. I mean, I couldn't find a better slogan or a better explanation for the slogan. Security is not a product; it's a process. We've got about 30 seconds, and I asked this question to everybody at the Power Hour. Sherry, if there was a book or a movie that you could recommend to someone or to anybody who wants to get into the space of cybersecurity, what would that be?
Uh, well, it's really interesting because there's a couple of things that come to mind. First is Insecurity. Jane Franklin wrote a great book on women in cybersecurity.
Okay.
So anybody, any woman or whatever that kind of is looking at a space, great opportunity. Honestly, one of the best books that I've ever read, which I mean, is Sean Harris was a fantastic author on the CISP
Okay.
series. So Certified Information Security
Okay.
Professional. And she's the late Sean Harris, but she did some really fantastic sort of prep for the exam guide. And
Fantastic.
honestly,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic book to learn about security at a high level, but across the board. And I always say to people, it's a really, really, those books right now. I mean, I think that you know, uh, there's a new version that's also out, but the books are really, really thick. But it's a really good guide to looking at every aspect and saying this is kind of what we do every day. Very important to actually understand this stuff. So it's not the glamorous, novel or whatever that I'm going to say, but that's actually what I actually would recommend for people to actually take a glance at. And yeah, Insecurity is a good
Fantastic.
book as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. So Sherry, I'm going to ask you to stay here for another 15 seconds because I have the challenging, or rather the impossible task of summarizing all of this and really taking a whole universe of experience and wrapping it up into one globe. So to our audience, what I will say is I've learned a lot from this discussion, and I mentioned very clearly that I see Sherry as a colleague, as a friend, but also as a mentor. And I said that for a very particular reason because I'm sure, just like myself, you learned from her this aspect of what's your own code of ethics as a security practitioner, as a security professional. The poet Rumi says, you have to break your heart often in order to open it up. And I think she's got you to realize that it's important that you open yourself up to multiple experiences and not necessarily stay in stone with rigid expectations. In this world of cybersecurity, there are numerous things that you have to learn, and travel, and mobility, and agility are some of these skill sets that we often don't talk about, but are skill sets that you need to embed within yourself. You know that moment when we had a question around warfare, and I made the statement around, we make war in order to achieve peace. I wasn't being facetious when I said that. You have to really think about the ironies of some of the statements and the ironies of some of the actions that we make. And we have to be answerable at first to ourselves and be able to govern ourselves with a code of ethics that makes sense and a code of ethics that can withstand the trials of time. Not everybody is going to understand your positions that you take in security. Not everybody is going to understand some of the suggestions that you make in order to protect our public interests as well as our private interests. And some people will constantly be a part of that noise. But I think it's important to understand that just as Sherry maintained, is that you need to draw the line and hold it in certain cases. And when people continue to talk and don't quite understand your position, well, the best answer and response to a fool is nothing but silence. And that silence can speak very loud. I'll see you again for another episode of the Power Hour. And this will be probably later beginning in September after the SiberXchange Summit, which begins next week. Don't forget to create your profile on www.siberexchange.ca, where the sessions kick off from Monday, August the 10th, beginning with healthcare. I want to thank Sherry once again for her time, for her openness, and more importantly, for making sure that she gave a piece of advice for the diverse audience that we have on cyberexchange.ca. Sherry, thank you very much for everything that you do, and I'm going to ask you to stay on so that we can just have some concluding remarks in our green room. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure's all mine.